Good morning, everyone, and welcome back to Advanced Topics in Ethnography. Glad to see that some of you are jumping right into the work of the course. Now we're going to move on to some more substantive matter regarding ethnographic method. And as you see this week in session 2, will be focusing on ethical considerations. Now, it's really important that we understand that in all research methods, it doesn't matter if they're naturalistic or if they're semi-experimental or even if they're experimental, ethics are an important part of research. I think all of us have had enough research training and background to know that. In the qualitative and or naturalistic methods, it's even more important because we're asking deeper questions. We're asking questions that are looking for a deeper understanding of meaning, either from individuals or from groups of people, and our questioning and our relationship with research participants is much closer. So to give you an example, when you submit a survey and it's anonymous, you get back results from that survey, and sometimes you don't even know who's responding. In fact, most of the time you shouldn't know who's responding if it's de-identified. When you are doing naturalistic research like ethnography, you're actually building a relationship with the participants that you're involved with. And again, if you recall from last week, there's a wide array of naturalistic research designs, but I believe that ethnography, because it really gets up and close with the phenomenon that's going on, and also the people that are part of it, and they will often be sharing very deep thoughts, very personal thoughts about their experience. And at times, it may not even be able to de-identify the material that they are sharing with you, especially if it's about, one particular person or small group of people. So we really need to start off giving time to think about how ethical considerations are important to ethnography in particular. Now, some of you may think when we talk about ethical considerations, we're simply talking about those sort of compliance orientation that we need to take, IRB, that sort of thing. But you will see through your reading this week that we're talking not just about what the minimum, and that's what I consider sort of compliance, that's the minimum of ethical consideration, to the more practical, intimate, I would say, relationship with the people or person you are studying. We will talk about in the reading a little bit about different variations in informed consent. That's important in ethnographic work. It is not A consent form is not always going to look the same necessarily in every type of research, especially if it's highly qualitative and if it's highly naturalistic, like ethnography is concerned, and also getting into how you might be encountering hostility in this sort of research. And hostility doesn't mean that someone is going to be hostile to you necessarily, but the subject matter would definitely include issues that might have a character to them that bring up thoughts of conflict and hostility, or illustrate how conflict and hostility are part of the story that you're beginning to understand, okay? Let me reiterate what I said in session one. In the amount of time we have in this semester, it's very hard and complicated to send you out into the field to do ethnographic work and have opportunity to write about it. So we're sort of using the unpack model, and we'll be looking at the ethnographies that I've introduced to you. And they're listed here in the Blackboard. At the moment, unless I missed it somehow, I only have 4 people that identified with which of the ethnographies they've chosen to read for this semester. So if I missed it somehow, please just drop me a line for the 2 classmates that have not made their final choice yet. Please let me know. So this week we want to begin to get accustomed with that ethnography. You will notice that there's a lot of supplemental information having to do with the ethnography, not just the story, in different ways in each one of those examples. And your first assignment is an ethics paper, short, 1 to 2 pages. And what I want you to think about is how are the authors addressing or interpreting ethics in their work? Like, what is the position that they take on ethics in their work? Do they even mention it and outright, or do you have to sort of fish around and try to understand what position they may have taken when they're dealing with their research participants? Secondly, how strictly and or emergent do you think their ethnographic methodology is as it relates to the way they carried out their research? What this question really means is, are they simply telling a story? Are they mixing that story with other sorts of resources that might not necessarily be someone's interview or someone's thoughts transcribed in a way? Are they using visualization? Are they using data in a more raw form to include in their ethnography? And part of this assignment is sort of going to be skimming. It might not all be in the very beginning of your ethnography that you're going to read from cover to cover. So I'm interested to hear what you think their approach to ethnography is, how they are considering themselves as the researcher, and how they're interpreting the method of ethnography in the way that they're writing the stories that they're doing. So each one of these is different, and I'd be very interested in hearing your take on it. Lastly, which of the issues found in the textbook does your ethnographer make a particular point to call out in the very beginning? So how does the ethnographer set up the scene that is going to be this long story, this book-long story that they're about to take? And by answering these questions, it's going to give you an idea of how ethnography differs from other types of methods in the way that it lays out what it's about to do. Many of you, I'm sure, have had different types of methodological classes, and ethnography and a lot of the other naturalistic types of research methods don't play by the same rules necessarily as some of the more positivistic, semi-experimental or experimental methods do. So, this is an opportunity to imagine through the examples I'm giving you how you might present a phenomena that you might study or might plan to study in your work. I know many of you are part of a doctoral program, and if this were the type of research method that you would generally choose to do your dissertation, how might you set it up? How might this differ than the typical way that you would write a research a dissertation? So I hope this gets us started in a way that will allow us to be critical in our understanding of the examples that I've given you, but also start to give you something to think about, especially if you're highly interested in doing ethnographic research. Now, I know some of you are not necessarily in doctoral programs and have written that you have jobs that would greatly benefit from understanding ethnographic method. And I think the same applies here, especially if you're in a clinical setting where you need to describe a clinical matter, an individual patient's unique issues. I think it's especially useful in complex diagnoses and definitely in family-centered care. So you may be thinking about, and I know someone here also works in student services, how are you going to tell the story and mediate for the person or people? They're not always going to be research participants, but they're going to be the players, the actors of the phenomenon. How are you going to utilize the methods that we learned from ethnography to bring that into the workplace so that you as a mediary, it doesn't matter if you're in student services, you're a researcher or a clinical person providing care, how are you going to mediate telling the story, which may be very complex, to someone else or to an audience that's not so familiar with the complexity of the problem you're dealing with. So I give you a video here to watch regarding ethics and anthropology. I think it's an important place to start because if you've ever done any anthropological work, you may have some past training in it. You realize it's quite a messy place out there. And it's really important that we're well grounded in knowing how and we want to do a study, for instance, and how we stay true to what we believe are the ethics that we as researchers need to uphold, but also the ethics associated with the responsibility of carrying someone else's story with its deep meaning into something that may even be published. I just finished, a student did her dissertation, and even through very traditional methods of semi-structured interviews and surveys, we found that the organization in which the study occurred actually still wanted some things redacted because they thought that it was too easy to identify individuals. In anthropology, specifically in ethnographic methods, we're actually calling out who these people are. It's sort of the opposite. So in each one of the examples that I've given you, we're actually making a point to say these types of people, be them doctors or veterans or whomever, children, we're actually calling them out. We're not masking it. And that requires a little different approach to how we manage ethics in the process of doing ethnography. So I look forward to reading your work. If you are someone who hasn't yet told me what your choice in ethnography is, please do so. I would love if we had two people on each book, but that's not a requirement. Please let me know by email, just so I can remember myself and put it into this little table on this page. I hope you have a great week, and I look forward to reading your assignments. Thank you. Bye-bye.